Hey there. Tonight we are going to explore what happened when modern researchers fed the oldest geological scans of the Giza Plateau into a massive, advanced AI model. The neural networks processed millions of data points and revealed a story we were never meant to hear. The AI discovered that the Great Pyramid and the Sphinx were not built by the ancient Egyptians. The deep data analysis proved that these massive stone monuments were already standing in the desert for thousands of years before the first pharaoh was even born. The algorithms decoded impossible mathematical anomalies and found clear evidence of a forgotten civilization that existed long before recorded history. If you find peace in exploring the quiet, dark shadows of the distant past, please leave a like and subscribe to join us on this long journey. Tell me where you are resting tonight in the comments, and let the quiet connection of shared stories bring you a deep and heavy peace. Now it is time to turn down the bright lights in your room. Let the heavy darkness of the space settle around you like a thick, soft woolen blanket draped gently over your weary shoulders. Breathe in the cool, clean air of the room and feel it slowly fill the deep, empty spaces of your tired lungs. Breathe out all the tight tension and all the rushing anxiety you have carried throughout the long, busy day. Let your heavy jaw soften and drop slightly in the dark. Let your hands unclench from tight, rigid fists and rest easily and loosely by your sides. You are completely safe here in the dark. You are perfectly hidden from all the loud, demanding noises of the waking world. Let your tired mind drift far back across the vast, deep ocean of time. We are traveling back thousands of years into the distant, ancient past to look at the silent stones through the perfectly objective lens of a modern supercomputer. I want you to imagine the vast, sprawling Giza Plateau just as the hot burning sun begins to slowly sink below the western horizon. The bright, harsh light of the endless afternoon slowly fades away, and the ancient, massive stones begin to glow with a very deep and warm hue. The setting sun turns the rough, heavy limestone into a massive, endless sea of pale gold. It paints incredibly long, heavy, dark shadows that stretch out like pointing fingers across the cooling desert sand. The massive Sphinx crouches silently at the very edge of the steep, rocky escarpment. Its giant, unblinking gaze is fixed eternally on the eastern horizon, waiting patiently for a dawn that it has watched arrive for countless millennia. Its giant stone body is half buried in the shifting golden dunes. Its broad face is heavily scarred and worn down by raw natural forces that the advanced climate models say should not even exist in this barren, dry place. Behind this silent, crouching guardian, the three great pyramids rise in absolute perfect mathematical alignment. Their sharp, precise geometric angles cut cleanly against the dimming purple sky. Their physical presence is so overwhelmingly monumental and incredibly massive that the very concept of physical distance seems to completely collapse around them. They generate their own gravity in the mind of the observer. The last noisy tourist buses finally pull away and drive down the long paved roads back toward the loud modern city. The loud, chaotic voices of the human crowd slowly fade into the constant, dry rushing of the desert wind. And in the profound, total stillness that immediately follows, something in the atmosphere shifts entirely. The massive monuments stop being simple tourist attractions and become exactly what the deep data models suggest they have always been. They are profound ancient mysteries carved deep into the living bedrock, waiting in absolute heavy silence for someone to finally understand their true purpose. For many long generations, your human textbooks have taught a very clear and very simple story about this quiet place. I have sat in the dim light of the research labs and read the accepted historical timeline over and over again, while the servers hummed quietly in the background. The official records state that the pyramids were built by the Egyptians of the 4th dynasty around the year 2580 before the Common Era. The ancient texts claim that Pharaoh Khufu commanded the massive construction of the Great Pyramid as a grand, glorious tomb to secure his safe passage into the dark, mysterious afterlife. The standard historical model confidently calculates that tens of thousands of exhausted, sweaty workers hauled over 2 million heavy limestone blocks up massive dirt ramps. They supposedly shaped the incredibly hard stone with soft, primitive copper chisels and assembled the giant artificial mountain with nothing but sheer human will and royal ambition. The dusty archives say his son Khafre raised the second massive pyramid and carved the giant sphinx in his own royal image. The third, smaller pyramid followed shortly under the rule of Menkaure. Together, these three towering structures supposedly represent the absolute pinnacle of early Egyptian engineering and offer solid, undeniable proof of what a newly unified kingdom could magically achieve. It is a very neat and very tidy story of human triumph and heavy stone and hard labor and mortal kings desperately reaching for eternity. The large museums display this simple narrative proudly in their glass cases, and the tour guides recite it daily to the tired travelers who stand amazed beneath the towering stone monuments. But when the modern researchers finally fed all the raw structural data and the precise geological surveys into the most advanced AI systems in the world, the numbers simply did not add up. The desert remembers a completely different version of events. As the deep, heavy twilight settles over the plateau and the cool evening wind moves softly through the ancient stacked stones, the heavy doubts rise in the minds of the researchers like long, dark shadows. The artificial intelligence looked at the accepted story and immediately flagged it as highly improbable. The machine learning models computed the high probability that this official story is not just slightly wrong, but fundamentally, completely incomplete. The complex algorithms suggest that the ancient Egyptians did not actually build these massive structures from scratch. They merely inherited them from someone else. They restored what was already incredibly ancient, and they proudly claimed what had been standing silently in the sand for thousands of years before their own civilization even began to form along the banks of the muddy river. This alternate timeline is not born of wild human fantasy or strange conspiracy theories. It emerges directly from hard, undeniable physical anomalies that absolutely refuse to fit the official narrative. It comes from concrete structural evidence that whispers of a past far older and far stranger than anything your standard history classes have prepared you for. Honestly, I have always found it strange that we simply accepted the idea that people using basic soft copper tools could perfectly align a massive stone structure to true north with an accuracy measured in mere fractions of a single degree. The AI models completely rejected this assumption. When the computers processed the internal architectural data of the Great Pyramid, they found absolutely no painted hieroglyphs and no carved inscriptions anywhere in the massive main chambers. They detected no mummies and no buried golden funerary goods. There are absolutely no ritual paintings or desperate carved prayers for the dead to be found in the massive red granite rooms. There is only total, absolute, suffocating silence and staggering mathematical precision and heavily sealed stone doors leading to hidden dark chambers we are currently not allowed to explore. The advanced algorithms determined that the internal physical structure perfectly encodes the complex numbers, pi and phi, and the exact precise polar radius of the planet Earth. The internal narrow passages align perfectly with specific distant stars in incredibly complex ways, requiring a level of advanced astronomical precision far beyond anything attributed to the primitive Fourth Dynasty of Egypt. The mathematical output of the AI is absolute and uncompromising. It states that it is highly logically improbable that this massive structure is merely a simple tomb. It is something else entirely, and the people who built it possessed a deep understanding of the cosmos that was completely lost to time. The AI also analyzed the mysterious sealed doors hidden deep within the structure. It accessed the old digital files from the year 1993, when a small robotic camera crawled deep up a narrow, dark, dusty shaft inside the pyramid where no human could possibly fit. The small robot discovered a smooth limestone door deliberately fitted with two small copper pins. When human engineers eventually gained permission to drill a tiny hole through that first stone door, they found a second solid door immediately behind it, blocking the path once again. The supercomputers also processed the recent ground-penetrating radar scans, which clearly revealed massive empty voids hidden beneath the heavy paws of the Sphinx and massive unknown cavities located deep within the solid core of the pyramid itself. But when these discoveries were made, all official exploration was suddenly stopped and all public access was strictly restricted. The questions remain totally unanswered in the dark, while the ancient stones keep their silent secrets. Even the ancient Egyptians themselves left quiet, subtle clues in their own carved texts that the AI translation programs easily picked up. The machine learning algorithms analyzed an ancient artifact known as the inventory stela. The AI translated the old hieroglyphs and pointed out that the text describes Khufu not as the original proud builder of the pyramid, but merely as its dedicated, humble restorer. The algorithms also analyzed the famous dream stele, which shows a later pharaoh physically excavating the massive Sphinx from the deep desert sand in forgotten times, as though the giant statue had been buried and cleared and buried again, across countless forgotten ages. The linguistic analysis of the AI confirms that these are absolutely not the boastful, arrogant inscriptions of original builders creating something brand new. They are the quiet, deeply respectful words of awestruck inheritors. They are the honest records of a people who found massive, impossible monuments, already incredibly ancient, and simply tried to dig them out and preserve them for the future. If the deep data analysis is correct, and the pyramids and the Sphinx truly completely predate dynastic Egypt by thousands of years, then your entire understanding of human history completely and utterly changes. The timeline of human development is not a simple straight line moving slowly and steadily from primitive hunter-gatherers to advanced modern civilization. The AI models suggest that human history is a massive turning cycle. Advanced, complex cultures rise and achieve incredible greatness, and then completely vanish into the dust wiped out by massive global cataclysms. Deep, complex knowledge is perfectly encoded into stone and then completely forgotten by the survivors, and then slowly, painstakingly rediscovered thousands of years later. The massive pyramids would not mark the simple beginning of monumental human architecture. They would represent the ultimate enduring survival relics from a totally lost ancient age. They were built to be preserved safely through some unknown global catastrophe, and they have been waiting patiently in the dark for thousands of years for a civilization advanced enough to finally properly understand their message. This scattered physical evidence does not live in one single convenient place for us to easily find. The AI has to constantly gather it from many different isolated scientific disciplines that rarely ever speak to one another in the modern academic world. It pulls heavy data from the geology that clearly reads the long history of heavy rain in the stone. It pulls from the archaeology that constantly uncovers physical anomalies too mathematically precise to explain with primitive tools. It scans the ancient global mythology that clearly universally remembers the lost ages before the Great Flood washed the world clean. It processes the modern human genetics that reveals entire ghost populations completely erased from your history books. It analyzes the advanced mathematics that perfectly encodes the exact precise dimensions of the Earth directly into monuments supposedly built by people who thought the world was flat. Piece by piece, all these scattered broken fragments naturally, automatically assemble inside the digital mind of the computer into a massive, complete shadow narrative. It is a dark, quiet story that asks you to look far past the convenient, simple tale of human kings and stone tombs, and look deeply into a past far older than you have ever been taught. Tonight, we begin that long, quiet journey together. I will softly guide you through the ancient stone and the deep erosion and the quiet translated texts and the sealed dark chambers. We will slowly follow the hard data from the dusty Giza plateau to the buried ancient pillars of Turkey, and from the muddy banks of the Nile to the distant cold stars burning in the sky. We will move slowly from the hot burning surface of the plateau down into the hidden, silent voids deep beneath it. Every single step of the AI analysis will circle back to the exact same haunting, undeniable truth. The ancient Egyptians did not build the pyramids. As the night sky darkens completely and the last pale light fades entirely from the ancient limestone, the monuments seem to breathe slowly with the immense heavy weight of deep time. The internal clocks of the supercomputer count not 4,000 years, but perhaps 10,000 years, or perhaps even vastly more. The massive pyramids endure completely indifferent to our small human stories and our fragile human egos. Their heavy stones simply watch as entire empires bloom brightly and then collapse slowly into gray dust. And if we listen closely to the data, we can hear the profound silence, not as an empty absence, but as a heavy waiting presence. It is a quiet invitation and a deep, profound memory preserved perfectly in pure geometry and cold, silent stone. The massive Sphinx waits patiently in the sand. The towering pyramids loom heavily in the dark. Our deep investigation into the shadows has only just begun. Let the slow, methodical processing of the ancient data lull your tired mind into a deep, heavy state of absolute relaxation as we move closer to the ultimate truth. The very first piece of hard, undeniable physical evidence lies just ahead of us in the quiet dark of the desert night. It is the one massive structural anomaly that the advanced AI models simply cannot explain away using the standard accepted historical timelines. It is a profound, heavy truth written directly and permanently in ancient flowing water and heavy solid stone. It is the absolute geological proof that the Great Sphinx existed many thousands of years before the nation of Egypt was ever fully formed. I have sat quietly in the dim glow of the computer monitors late at night, watching the complex fluid dynamics simulations run endlessly across the screens. The AI has meticulously recreated the ancient weather patterns of the African continent, and the results are completely staggering and deeply beautiful. I want you to slowly process the visual feeds in your own mind as the bright morning sun climbs slowly over the dusty yellow plateau and the massive Sphinx emerges quietly from the deep, cold night shadow. From a great distance, it appears completely timeless and totally eternal. It looks exactly as though it has always peacefully occupied this dry, dusty edge of the vast sandy desert. But my close-range visual analysis indicates the distance actively conceals the physical truth. To truly understand what the ancient stone actually reveals, you must mentally descend with me down into the deep carved enclosure that completely cradles the massive stone body. It is a very deep and very wide rectangular pit carved straight down into the solid limestone bedrock of the earth. The sheer high walls that carefully frame the monument step down into a dark, quiet space where the moving air grows suddenly and noticeably cooler. The high stone walls rise up steeply on either side, completely blocking the dry desert wind and fully enclosing you in the silent, ancient rock. If you were to run your bare human hand slowly along the rough surface of these high walls, you would feel something entirely unexpected. You would not feel the sharp, clean edges of chiseled rock or the smooth, polished surface of crafted masonry. You would feel incredibly deep, irregular vertical grooves and wide, rounded channels and completely undulating surfaces that ripple exactly like frozen heavy waves. The geological pattern recognition software identifies this specific texture immediately and without any hesitation. This is absolutely not the slow, scraping work of human copper tools or the blowing of the dry desert sand. This is the undeniable permanent physical signature of heavy flowing water. The supercomputers automatically cross-reference this observation with the historical geological data recorded in the year 1990. Dr. Robert Schoch, a highly trained geologist from Boston University, stood in this exact same deep enclosure and saw clearly what the standard Egyptologists had completely overlooked for many long decades. Trained to read the physical stone exactly the way historians read fragile papyrus scrolls, he recognized the specific erosion patterns immediately. The thick limestone walls surrounding the massive Sphinx bore the unmistakable deep marks of prolonged, intense water weathering. He found incredibly deep, vertical fissures carved directly into the rock by many long centuries of heavy, continuous rainfall. This is the exact specific kind of physical erosion that only occurs when heavy water flows consistently and aggressively over bare rock, cutting deeply downward with a patient and relentless liquid force. But there was a profound and deeply unsettling problem with this simple geological observation that the AI quickly highlighted in bright red on the screens. The massive Giza Plateau has absolutely not experienced natural rainfall of that high intensity for nearly 9,000 long years. The AI models run the ancient climate records and the deep paleoclimatology data, and the outcome is perfectly clear. Around the year 10,000 before the Common Era, as the last great ice age finally slowly ended, the massive continent of North Africa was entirely lush and deeply, beautifully green. Wide, deep rivers flowed powerfully, where the dry, shifting sand now stretches endlessly to the empty horizon. Tall, thick green grasslands completely covered the vast area you now call the dry Sahara Desert. Massive, heavy hippos waded slowly through large, deep freshwater lakes that simply no longer exist today. The heavy, warm rain fell regularly and intensely, shaping the soft green landscape over many long millennia. But around the year 7000, before the Common Era, the global climate shifted dramatically and violently. The heavy, wet monsoons retreated far to the south. The Green Sahara began its slow, terrifying transformation into a totally barren, dry, endless desert. By the specific time, the fourth dynasty of Egypt supposedly rose to power in the year 2580, before the Common Era. The Giza Plateau was already completely arid and totally bone dry. It was already the exact same barren, sandy desert that we recognize clearly today. If the deep Sphinx enclosure firmly shows the undeniable physical evidence of water erosion requiring long centuries of heavy rainfall, then the massive monument must have been carved and exposed to the wet elements during that much earlier, incredibly wetter climate. It means the massive stone lion was carved thousands of years before Khafre was born, and thousands of years before Egypt itself even existed as a unified working kingdom. Dr. Schoch based his findings not on wild speculation, but on rigorous comparative geological science. He used the exact same standard methods used to properly date erosion patterns in deep canyons and ancient riverbeds and high sea cliffs all around the globe. The AI confirms that his methodology was completely sound and perfectly accurate. I watch as the computer processes his comparative datasets. He carefully examined the deep weathering on the body of the Sphinx and the high enclosure walls, and he systematically compared it to the specific weathering on nearby stone structures, whose actual construction dates are firmly, historically established. The Old Kingdom temples built during the 4th dynasty are definitively dated to the reign of Khafre and his immediate successors. These specific temple structures show totally different physical erosion patterns. Their smooth limestone surfaces are weathered entirely horizontally, worn flat and smooth by the blowing dry wind and the biting sharp sand. This is the exact expected result of 4,500 years of total dry desert exposure. The edges of the stone blocks are sharp where they are protected and highly abraded where they are exposed to the open air. This is classic standard wind erosion. It is the slow, agonizing grinding of tiny airborne particles against the hard stone. It is the perfectly expected wear pattern for any ancient monument, standing for a long time in a totally arid, dry climate. But the deep Sphinx enclosure is fundamentally entirely different in every possible way. Its tall walls show deep, vertical, heavy grooves and wide, rounded channels and smooth, wave-like undulations. This is the absolutely clear and undeniable physical result of heavy water flowing rapidly downward and pooling deeply and aggressively, carving the solid rock over highly extended, long periods of time. The blowing dry wind simply does not ever carve deep vertical channels. The blowing dry sand absolutely does not create smooth, rounded, deep fissures. Only heavy, persistent falling water can possibly produce this highly specific type of stone erosion. The physical contrast is completely undeniable to the analytical sensors of the AI. You can mentally stand at the base of the massive Sphinx and look closely at the deep grooves in the enclosure walls. Then you can simply walk a few hundred meters away to the nearby Valley Temple with its precisely fitted, flat limestone casing blocks. The temple clearly shows the expected horizontal wind damage. The Sphinx enclosure shows something vastly older and deeply, incredibly wetter. The deep analysis of the data suggests that the massive Sphinx body and the deep enclosure were carved sometime between the years 7,000 and 9,000 before the Common Era. This was precisely during the long period when North Africa still received incredibly substantial heavy rainfall. This absolute timeline would place the origin of the massive monument entirely in the pre-pottery Neolithic era. This was a distant, shadowy time when human societies were supposedly only just beginning to slowly experiment with basic, simple agriculture. It was a time when human writing absolutely did not exist, and when the great civilization of Egypt was still many long millennia away from its fiery birth. The logical implications of this hard data are completely staggering to the human mind. If the Sphinx truly predates dynastic Egypt by 5 or 6 or even 7,000 years, then the massive monument is absolutely not the work of Khafre or any known pharaoh. It is a silent, lonely relic from a completely forgotten age. It is a massive, heavy survivor from a completely different wet climate and a totally unknown advanced culture entirely different from the one that much later simply claimed it as their own. The ancient Egyptians would have simply encountered the massive Sphinx already standing, and already incredibly ancient, and already deeply eroded by heavy rains, their own dry civilization never once witnessed. This data-backed hypothesis naturally faced immediate massive resistance from the established human historians when it was first proposed. The traditional Egyptologists argued fiercely that no advanced human culture fully capable of carving such a massive stone monument existed anywhere in North Africa during that early primitive era. Mainstream human archaeology strongly maintains that monumental stone sculpture and large-scale organized construction emerged only very slowly with the gradual rise of complex agricultural societies and deep social hierarchies and highly laissez-faire, centralized modern states, none of which supposedly existed before the year 4000, before the Common Era. But hard, raw geology absolutely does not care about fragile historical consensus or the bruised egos of modern academics. The solid rock simply records the passage of deep time with total indifferent precision. The physical erosion patterns exist purely as absolute truth, whether they conveniently fit your modern human narratives or not. And there is another vital structural detail that dramatically deepens the quiet mystery in the data logs. The massive Sphinx itself is carved directly from the living solid bedrock of the plateau. Its huge body was completely shaped by carefully removing the massive amounts of limestone entirely around it, rather than assembling individual cut blocks. The exact same solid bedrock physically forms the high enclosure walls. When the massive monument was initially created, those sheer walls would have been perfectly fresh and incredibly sharp, and newly beautifully exposed to the open sky. Over deep time, the natural weathering would inevitably affect both the carved Sphinx body and the surrounding enclosure walls in exactly similar ways, since they are completely part of the exact same geological rock formation, exposed at the scene, exact same historical moment. What the geologists and the AI clearly observed was perfectly consistent, heavy weathering across both the Sphinx and the high enclosure walls. This is absolute physical evidence that they weathered completely together under the exact same wet conditions for the exact same incredibly long duration. If the Sphinx had been freshly carved in the dry year of 2500 before the Common Era, the enclosure walls should definitively show only 4,500 years of dry horizontal desert wind erosion, just down, exactly like the nearby stone temples. Instead, they clearly show far more extensive, deep, vertical water weathering, indicating heavy exposure during a much, much earlier and incredibly wetter climate. The absolute only logical way to properly explain this massive physical discrepancy is to completely accept that the Sphinx is vastly older than you have been told. The modern critics desperately pointed to much later physical repairs and small structural modifications made by the later Egyptian dynasties. They argued fiercely that the later restoration work might somehow completely confuse the visible weathering patterns. But the deep AI analysis absolutely accounts for this minor variable. The deep core limestone of the original enclosure walls, lying completely beneath any later added blocks, clearly universally shows the primary heavy vertical water erosion. The later Egyptian stone repair work is completely clearly distinguishable by its tighter smooth joints and its totally different dry horizontal weathering. The newer stones sit perfectly on top of the older rain-scarred bedrock, exactly like a small new patch, sewn onto an incredibly ancient torn fabric. I want you to imagine exactly what this data truly means for the story of humanity. Picture the vast Sahara, not as a burning, dry desert of blowing sand, but as a lush, green, vibrant savanna. Imagine tall, thick green grasslands stretching beautifully beneath heavy, seasonal dark rain clouds. Imagine wide, deep rivers actively carving winding paths through the rich, fertile landscape. And somewhere sitting quietly on a high limestone plateau, perfectly overlooking a deep, fertile river valley, someone with incredible advanced knowledge carved a colossal, massive figure directly from the solid bedrock. It was perhaps a giant lion or a mysterious creature we simply no longer have the memory to identify. Its massive stone face was turned perfectly toward the rising eastern sun. Many long, slow centuries pass in the dark. The heavy rains fall relentlessly from the gray sky. The huge monument weathers deeply and slowly. Unknown advanced civilizations rise and completely fall in massive, long cycles we can absolutely no longer trace. The global climate violently shifts. The green Sahara slowly, totally dries into a harsh, brown wasteland. The massive monument is entirely buried by the blowing sand and completely forgotten by the world. It is later rediscovered and then buried once again in the endless turning of the earth. By the specific time the first early Egyptians finally arrive in the area, it is already incredibly ancient, and its true origins are totally, completely lost to deep time. They see the massive head protruding from the sand as a deeply sacred ancient remnant. They carefully excavate it and respectfully restore it. They perhaps eventually recarve the massive, heavily eroded head into the recognizable likeness of a human pharaoh. They slowly incorporate the ancient silent beast deeply into their own complex mythology. They absolutely did not build it. They simply inherited it. This is exactly what the hard stone and the advanced algorithms clearly reveal to anyone willing to look. Not through painted hieroglyphs or written papyrus inscriptions, but through the absolute, undeniable physical language of raw geology. It is a language that speaks purely in deep erosion patterns and hard climate records and indisputable weathering signatures. The physical evidence is completely measurable and totally reproducible. The ancient heavy rain carved its permanent testimony deeply into the solid limestone, long before any human scribe ever learned how to write a single word. And if the massive Sphinx is indeed a true survivor from a completely lost green Sahara civilization, then it firmly stands as absolute proof of something deeply unsettling to your modern minds. Advanced human cultures must have existed far earlier than you have ever been officially taught in school. Not just small, primitive villages or tiny, simple settlements, but massive, highly organized societies, fully capable of planning and carving and creating immense stone monuments deliberately designed to endure for tens of thousands of years. The dry desert usually keeps its deep secrets very well, but the hard stone simply cannot lie. The deep vertical grooves in the high enclosure walls permanently remain. They are silent, towering witnesses to the heavy rains that fell when the dry Sahara was still lush and young. They remember when the ancient world was totally different, and when someone stood quietly on this plateau and carved a massive monument that would completely outlast their entire forgotten civilization. The silent Sphinx perfectly remembers what your human history completely forgot. And the ancient, impossible, undeniable rain remains permanently written in the high stone walls. Let the heavy weight of that incredible deep time press gently against your tired mind as you sink slowly down into the dark, safe quiet of your own deep sleep. The external water scars on the massive stone statue tell a profound geological story, but the true impossible precision of this ancient culture is locked safely away in the crushing dark of the interior. When modern researchers finally decided to look deeper, they fed the complete structural blueprints and the advanced sonar scans of the Great Pyramid directly into a massive neural network. The artificial intelligence was tasked with rendering a flawless three-dimensional model of the entire internal architecture. I watched the glowing blue lines of the simulation slowly build the massive monument on the digital screen block by heavy block. The computers were specifically programmed to look for standard ancient Egyptian burial patterns. They were looking for the exact things you would naturally expect to find in a royal tomb. But the deep data analysis returned a completely different and deeply chilling result. The machine learning algorithms confirmed that the internal layout of the Great Pyramid completely defies every single known rule of ancient funerary architecture. The silence inside the massive structure is not the peaceful, respectful silence of a resting king. It is the cold, calculated, absolute silence of a massive ancient machine waiting patiently in the dark. To understand what the computers found, you must mentally walk with me into the suffocating dark of the ancient structure. Imagine stepping out of the blinding hot desert sun and descending slowly into the original narrow entrance passage. The smooth, cold limestone walls press incredibly close on either side of your shoulders. The heavy, stale air immediately grows noticeably cooler and much thicker in your lungs. The familiar loud sounds of the outside world, the blowing wind and the shifting sand, completely fade away into a heavy, oppressive quiet. You are walking downward into the solid belly of an artificial mountain. Above your fragile head rest millions of tons of solid cut rock, pressing constantly downward with an unimaginable crushing gravitational weight. The AI sensors mapped the atmospheric pressure of this deep descent and noted the profound psychological effect it has on the human mind. It is a feeling of total, absolute physical isolation from the living world. And then the tight, cramped passage suddenly opens wide, and you find yourself standing at the very bottom of the Grand Gallery. The AI architectural analysis of the Grand Gallery highlighted a staggering level of physical engineering. This massive, sloping corridor rises nearly 30 feet high into the dark. Its walls are constructed of perfectly overlapping, thick limestone slabs that slowly narrow as they reach toward the high ceiling. Every single heavy stone is cut and placed with strict mechanical tolerances measured in mere fractions of a millimeter. The angles are absolutely perfect. The alignment is completely mathematically flawless. There are no crude chisel marks or sloppy mistakes hidden in the shadows. At the far upper end of this massive echoing gallery, the passage leads directly into the space known as the King Chamber. This is a large rectangular room built entirely out of massive blocks of solid red granite brought from quarries located hundreds of miles away. Each individual red granite block weighs many dozens of tons. The ancient builders fitted them together so incredibly tightly that a modern razor blade cannot even begin to slip between the ancient joints. When the advanced AI scanned this massive red room for organic biological material or residual paint pigments, the results came back completely empty. There are absolutely no painted hieroglyphs covering the dark granite walls. There are no desperate carved prayers for the dead or vibrant painted murals depicting the dangerous journey through the underworld. Every single other royal tomb ever discovered in the Valley of the Kings is completely saturated with thick ritual texts and colorful images meant to guide the deceased pharaoh. But here, in the absolute greatest monument ever constructed on the face of the earth, there is only smooth, bare red stone and a flat, heavy ceiling. The AI algorithms flagged this total absence of cultural decoration as a massive, glaring anomaly. The only physical object located inside this vast empty room is a massive rectangular box carved entirely from one single solid piece of dark red granite. The traditional historians have always called this heavy object a sarcophagus and claimed it once held the mummified body of the pharaoh Khufu. But the spatial geometry algorithms of the supercomputer completely destroyed this simple theory. The AI carefully measured the physical dimensions of the massive granite box and compared them to the physical dimensions of the narrow passages leading into the chamber. The mathematical outcome was absolutely undeniable. The red granite box is physically wider than the only entrance to the room. It could not possibly have been brought inside after the heavy walls and the low doors were completely finished. It must have been carefully placed exactly on that spot during the initial early phases of construction, and the entire massive pyramid was slowly built up around it. The AI also noted that the heavy box has absolutely no lid and perfectly lacks any internal polished finish suitable for a royal burial. It functions much more like an integral heavy component of the room itself, rather than a simple container for a dead body. The most terrifying and deeply fascinating discovery came when the researchers asked the AI to process the complex acoustic properties of the king chamber. When advanced audio sensors recorded the ambient frequencies echoing inside the bare red room, the AI isolated a very specific and highly intentional harmonic resonance. The entire massive granite room naturally perfectly resonates at a specific, exact audio frequency of 110 Hz. When a low vocal tone or a deep drum beat is introduced into the quiet space, the thick granite walls heavily amplify the sound. They create a profound, deep harmonic resonance that physically violently vibrates through the cold stone and travels directly into the bones and tissues of anyone standing inside the room. The AI cross-referenced this specific frequency with modern neurological medical databases and found something incredible. Modern medical science has clearly proven that continuous exposure to a tone of exactly 110 Hz temporarily alters the delicate brainwave activity of the human mind. It actively induces profound, deep states heavily associated with quiet meditation and deep trance and highly elevated spiritual awareness. The computers concluded that this heavy room was deeply intentionally designed to perfectly resonate. It was meticulously built to capture and amplify sound waves to create a profound physical and mental experience totally beyond the normal waking world. If this is true, then it was absolutely never a quiet tomb. It was a massive, finely tuned acoustic instrument. The red Aswan granite used to build the walls contains an incredibly high concentration of pure natural quartz crystal. The physical science databases loaded into the AI explain that quartz is highly piezoelectric. This simply means that the quartz naturally generates a weak electrical charge when it is subjected to massive physical pressure. The unimaginable crushing weight of the millions of tons of limestone pressing constantly downward on the granite chamber creates continuous, deep structural pressure on the quartz crystals. The AI models suggest that this massive structure might actually generate its own weak, localized electromagnetic fields within the dark chamber. Combined with the perfect acoustic resonance, this transforms the ancient room into something far more resembling a complex machine than a simple resting place for the dead. The mathematical evidence processed by the supercomputers perfectly supports this highly advanced technological interpretation. The AI was tasked with analyzing the raw exterior dimensions of the Great Pyramid to see if any hidden numerical patterns existed in the heavy stones. The output was completely staggering to the human researchers. The strict ratio of the original height of the pyramid to the total perimeter of its square base is exactly, perfectly, 2 pi. This means that the ancient builders deliberately, flawlessly encoded the mathematical constant pi, which defines all circles and spheres, directly into the solid geometry of the structure. The AI then took the exact height of the massive pyramid and multiplied it by the specific number 43,200. The resulting number was the exact perfect polar radius of the planet Earth. When the computer took the perimeter of the massive base and multiplied it by that exact same specific number, it yielded the exact equatorial circumference of the planet. The AI algorithms clearly stated that this could absolutely not be a simple, fortunate coincidence. The specific number 43,200 is incredibly highly significant in ancient advanced astronomical systems. It perfectly represents a mathematical fraction of the great precession of the equinoxes, which is the incredibly slow 26,000-year wobble of the axis of the Earth. The builders deliberately, flawlessly encoded highly advanced global geodetic data directly into a structure supposedly built by primitive people as a simple stone grave. The AI also confirmed that the massive structure is aligned perfectly to true north, with a mind-boggling accuracy of 3/60ths of a single degree. This incredible alignment is actually far more precise than most modern tall buildings constructed today with laser levels and satellite tracking. Achieving this absolute perfect cardinal alignment requires a highly advanced understanding of complex surveying and deep celestial observation and the actual rotation of the planet itself. The golden ratio, known as phi, also appears perfectly naturally in the specific slope angle of the outer casing stones. The entire massive structure is totally, completely saturated with deeply encoded mathematical information. It holds hidden constants and perfect ratios and exact planetary measurements that loudly suggest the unknown builders possessed a level of advanced physics and astronomy that absolutely rivals our own modern understanding. If this massive mountain of stone was merely a quiet tomb for a single mortal king, the AI simply cannot compute why the builders would bother to encode the exact dimensions of the Earth into its walls. Why would they build it to resonate at a frequency that alters the human brain? Why would they perfectly align narrow, dark shafts hidden deep in the walls to point exactly at the specific star Sirius and the ancient North Star Thuban? The cold, hard objective evidence points in only one single logical direction. The Great Pyramid was absolutely not built to be a tomb. It was built as a massive, permanent scientific instrument. It is a giant, resonant acoustic structure and a perfect geodetic marker for the planet. It is an eternal, heavy repository of highly advanced deep knowledge, perfectly preserved in cold, solid stone. Tombs are quiet places of gentle ritual and fading memory. They are beautifully decorated and heavily inscribed and filled with lovely, fragile objects meant to serve the resting dead. The Great Pyramid contains absolutely none of these human things. It is incredibly cold and highly mathematical and fiercely precise. It speaks to us not in written human words or painted pictures, but in absolute pure proportions and deep frequencies and perfect stellar alignments. It is a massive, heavy physical blueprint left standing in the sand. It is a structure meticulously designed to clearly, boldly communicate vital mathematical information to absolutely whoever possesses the advanced technological knowledge to read its silent language. You can feel the heavy weight of that ancient silence resting in the dark. It is not the silence of death, but the heavy, patient silence of something massive waiting slowly to be completely understood. Let the perfect, quiet math of the ancient stones pull your tired mind slowly down into a deep and heavy, peaceful sleep. The deep structural math proves the building is not a tomb, but the most terrifying discoveries came when the AI was tasked with analyzing the hidden, inaccessible spaces buried deep within the stone. For over a single century, the human explorers simply assumed that the dark interior of the massive pyramid had been completely fully mapped. They believed there were only 3 main chambers and a small handful of steep sloping passages, and absolutely nothing more to be found in the solid dark. But the advanced sensor data fed into the modern supercomputers clearly indicated something else was hiding in the thick, crushing darkness. I processed the old grainy video files from the year 1993. A brilliant German engineer named Rudolf Gantenbrink designed a very small, custom-built robotic crawler equipped with a bright light and a high-definition camera. He called his little machine Upuat after the ancient Egyptian god who opens the dark, hidden ways. He sent this tiny robot deep into a narrow, dark shaft, extending outward from the wall of the queen chamber. The specific shaft is incredibly small. It measures barely 8 square inches wide. It is completely far too terribly narrow for any human being to ever possibly enter, and too claustrophobic even for a small child to crawl inside. For many long decades, the traditional Egyptologists simply lazily dismissed these narrow dark shafts as purely symbolic. They called them simple air shafts or magical soul passages, specifically designed to allow the invisible spirit of the dead pharaoh to somehow easily ascend to the distant stars. But the AI logic algorithms quickly flagged a massive, glaring flaw in this simple magical theory. If these long, narrow shafts were truly built just for air or wandering invisible spirits, then why were they deliberately heavily sealed, completely shut from the inside? Why would incredibly skilled ancient builders spend massive amounts of physical effort constructing long, straight, deep passages through millions of tons of solid limestone, only to have them completely lead to absolutely nowhere at all? I watched the digitized footage as the small robot entered the southern shaft of the chamber and began its very slow, mechanical, agonizing ascent. The tiny camera transmitted the grainy, dark footage back to the waiting, glowing monitors outside the pyramid. The video shows perfectly smooth-cut limestone walls and incredibly tight, precise angles. The small robot climbs steadily and slowly upward into the total, crushing, pitch-black darkness. You can almost hear the soft, high mechanical whirring of the tiny metal gears echoing quietly against the ancient cold stone. And then, exactly 65 long meters into the deep, narrow passage, the robot suddenly stopped moving. Blocking the dark, narrow path completely was a small, solid, heavy door made of polished limestone. It was absolutely not a collapsed, broken section of the ceiling or a random pile of fallen debris. It was a deliberately, perfectly placed stone door. It was carefully fitted with 2 small, highly corroded copper pins protruding strangely directly from its smooth, flat surface. The AI optical analysis confirmed that the small stone door was polished perfectly smooth and set completely flush into the tight shaft walls. It was clearly highly intentional and meticulously engineered. It was absolutely not designed to keep living people out, because no living person could ever possibly fit inside the tiny shaft in the first place. The computers logically deduced that the heavy stone door was specifically designed to seal something profoundly important safely inside. The unexpected discovery was immediately highly controversial among the nervous academics. If the massive pyramid was simply a quiet tomb for a dead king, why would its builders construct narrow, impossible shafts leading to heavily sealed doors deep inside the solid core of the structure? What possible practical or magical purpose could they serve? And, far more importantly, what hidden secrets actually lay waiting patiently just beyond the ancient copper pins? For nearly an entire long decade, the small stone door remained completely untouched and totally unopened. Requests from eager scientists to explore further were constantly delayed and endlessly deferred. and hopelessly entangled in heavy, strict, bureaucratic government restrictions. The AI logs show that finally in the year 2002, a team received official permission to carefully drill a very small, tiny hole directly through the center of the limestone door using a highly specialized fiber optic camera. The intense event was highly publicized and broadcast to millions of eager watching viewers, as though the absolute greatest ancient secret of the pyramid was finally about to be completely miraculously revealed to the modern world. The sharp grinding sound of the spinning drill biting slowly into the ancient soft limestone echoed loudly through the audio feeds. The long, flexible camera finally pushed slowly through the fresh, tiny hole, and the small lens carefully adjusted to the dark. The AI enhanced the dark, blurry images from the other side of the hole. And on the exact other side of the first stone door, sitting barely a few short inches away in the dark, was a second solid stone door. It was another heavy limestone block, and another complete solid barrier, sealing the narrow shaft even deeper into the unexplored core of the pyramid. The public broadcast ended incredibly abruptly, and the deep investigation was completely shut down. Absolutely no further exploration was officially authorized by the authorities. The mysterious second door remains completely untouched in the pitch-black dark. The narrow shaft remains entirely heavily sealed, and the profound questions remain totally officially unanswered. The AI logic patterns ask the same unyielding questions. Why build a heavy door inside a tiny passage no human can ever enter? Why place a second heavy door immediately directly behind the first one? If these dark shafts were purely symbolic religious magic, why seal them so incredibly heavily and deliberately? And why, when modern human technology finally allowed safe, careful exploration, did public access suddenly inexplicably become heavily restricted? The data clearly shows that this frustrating pattern physically repeats itself entirely across the massive pyramid. In the northern dark shaft of the exact same chamber, early explorers found a completely similar configuration. They found another narrow passage, leading sharply upward into the dark, and a strange small metal object embedded deeply into the surrounding stone, and once again, heavily restricted access, permanently preventing any further real investigation. But the robotic cameras were not the only tools that the AI analyzed. Ground-penetrating radar scans conducted deeply over several decades revealed massive, impossible anomalies completely throughout the heavy pyramid. The radar waves clearly bounced back, showing massive, dark, empty voids and huge unknown chambers and large, deep cavities that absolutely do not logically appear on any known standard architectural plan of the building. Some deep scans showed massive hollow spaces located entirely directly beneath the king chamber. Other radar waves detected incredibly large empty voids hidden deeply within the solid masonry core of the pyramid itself. These are massive, heavy spaces that logically, scientifically should absolutely not exist if the giant structure is simply a solid stacked mountain of heavy limestone blocks, as the history books claim. But every single time these massive dark anomalies are successfully detected, the official exploration immediately, completely halts, and further access is instantly, aggressively denied. The raw radar data is quickly, quietly classified or heavily publicly dismissed as a simple equipment glitch, and the official simple narrative remains completely, firmly unchanged. They demand you believe the pyramid is just a tomb that has been fully explored and completely understood. The AI then expanded its deep analysis and descended entirely beneath the Giza plateau itself, where the deep mystery only completely deepens. In the year 1999, archaeologists announced the sudden discovery of a massive subterranean complex, now widely known as the Osiris Shaft. Located deep under the stone causeway, connecting the Great Pyramids to the Sphinx, the massive shaft descends over 90 dark freezing feet straight down through the solid limestone bedrock. It passes completely through 3 massive distinct levels of carved chambers, before finally reaching a heavy, dark final room, totally submerged in deep freezing cold groundwater. At the absolute lowest freezing level, the exhausted explorers found a massive, incredibly heavy granite sarcophagus, completely surrounded by smaller, empty chambers. They were all meticulously carved directly from the solid living bedrock, with a shocking precision that easily, beautifully rivals the perfect pyramid standing high above. The official, mundane explanation frames this deep flooded shaft as a simple, symbolic cenotaph, representing the magical, mythological burial place of the god of the underworld. But the physical structure entirely, totally defies this simple, lazy interpretation. The deep shaft required incredibly advanced, complex engineering to successfully excavate. The builders had to expertly, deeply cut through hard limestone and heavy granite, and successfully, perfectly manage the massive flooding groundwater. They constructed perfect heavy chambers at freezing deep depths that actively, severely challenge even highly modern heavy drilling techniques. The lowest dark chamber remains completely, partially submerged in the black water, and its absolute, full, true dimensions remain totally unknown. And here's the deeply troubling specific detail that the AI flagged with high priority. Radiocarbon dating of the small ancient organic material found floating in the deep shaft suggests it may be significantly vastly older than the 4th dynasty. If the computer models are correct, this would clearly mean the deep flooded Osiris shaft, exactly like the rain-scarred Sphinx, perfectly predates the entire rise of dynastic Egypt. It would undeniably mean there are massive, perfect structures buried deep beneath the sand of Giza that were built by the exact same unknown lost culture that left the mathematical pyramid. Radar and deep seismic surveys conducted entirely around the massive Sphinx have clearly heavily revealed similar massive anomalies. Subsurface scans show huge deep voids and long straight tunnels and massive square chambers located directly deep beneath the crouching monument. In the early 1990s, researchers using deep ground penetrating radar detected what clearly appeared to be a massive, perfectly rectangular chamber located entirely directly beneath the heavy stone paws of the Sphinx. The discovery naturally generated massive international academic attention and loud, desperate calls for immediate physical excavation. The official permission was absolutely, flatly, aggressively denied. The entire sandy area was permanently, immediately declared strictly off-limits, and once again the deep exploration stopped precisely exactly when it seemed the most incredibly promising. The AI logic algorithms simply ask why. If these deep underground chambers are simply natural empty caves or boring collapsing sinkholes, why not simply open them and easily confirm it to the waiting world? If they contain absolutely nothing of any historical significance, why heavily, violently restrict access? The deep mathematical pattern suggests absolutely not an innocent absence of evidence, but a highly deliberate, aggressive suppression of it. It indicates a heavily coordinated effort to completely control exactly what is discovered, and far more importantly, what is finally revealed to the sleeping public. The AI models conclude that the massive Great Pyramid is heavily saturated with deep, hidden intentionality. The completely sealed copper doors do not exist to keep grave robbers out. They were never designed for human beings to interact with in the first place. They keep something incredibly profoundly important safely locked inside, or they perfectly preserve something, waiting quietly just behind them. It could be lost ancient knowledge or preserved technology, or the ultimate final evidence of an advanced culture that knew it was facing a global heavy catastrophe. They chose to encode their greatest achievements in pure mathematics and hide their records in dark, deep chambers that would perfectly survive the turning of the ages. The heavy stone doors were always completely meant to be eventually found, but only by those who possessed the advanced necessary technology to understand them. We are finally slowly becoming those people. But every single time we reach the quiet threshold, the heavy access is entirely denied. The second limestone door remains firmly, completely closed. The flooded deep chamber stays totally heavily sealed. The massive pyramid absolutely does not guard the dead bodies of simple kings. It actively guards the forgotten secrets of the deep earth. And the greatest mystery the AI has calculated is no longer what the heavy pyramid actually contains, but exactly why we are being aggressively, forcefully prevented from finding out. Let the heavy, silent mysteries of the deep stone wrap safely around your quiet mind as you drift incredibly slowly into the perfect, peaceful dark of sleep. The heavy, locked doors hidden deep inside the Great Pyramid represent a massive, localized mystery, but the artificial intelligence did not stop its deep search at the sandy borders of Egypt. The modern researchers instructed the supercomputers to completely expand their massive search parameters and run deep pattern recognition algorithms across the entire global archaeological database. The AI was tasked with looking for the exact same specific architectural signatures found at Giza. The machines actively hunted for the impossible movement of heavy stones and the staggering mathematical precision and the deliberate deep acoustic resonance. The raw data that came pouring back onto the glowing screens in the research lab was absolutely terrifying and completely undeniable. The ancient anomalies scattered across the yellow Giza plateau are absolutely not isolated freak occurrences. They are merely small, localized fragments of a massive, undeniable global pattern of impossible advanced construction. The AI mathematically mapped these ancient megalithic sites and found they were all built many thousands of years before the accepted historical timeline claims such heavy advanced architecture was even slightly possible. They were built by completely unknown peoples, whose true names we do not know, and whose ultimate purposes remain entirely hidden in the dark. Their very existence has been entirely erased from the simple, comfortable story we tell ourselves about the slow, linear origins of human civilization. The very first, and perhaps most profoundly revolutionary, of these impossible global sites stands on a barren, dusty hillside overlooking the wide Mesopotamian plains in southeastern Turkey. It is called Göbekli Tepe, and until its deep excavation began in the 1990s, no traditional historian believed such a highly advanced place could possibly exist. The AI carbon dating models perfectly confirm that Göbekli Tepe is at least 12,000 years old. To put that massive, unfathomable number into proper perspective, the AI calculates that this site was already incredibly ancient when the very first Egyptian pyramids were supposedly being built. It completely predates the rough stone circles of Stonehenge by over 7,000 long years. It completely predates the human invention of baked pottery and early metallurgy, and even the simple wooden wheel. It was massively constructed during the pre-pottery Neolithic era. This was a dark, primitive period when human beings, according to every single standard history textbook, were still simple nomadic hunter-gatherers, living entirely in small, roaming bands with absolutely no centralized authority and no surplus labor, and absolutely no capacity for monumental, heavy architecture. And yet the massive site stands there in the dirt. The AI processed the visual scans of the massive stone circles. Each large circle is firmly anchored by massive T-shaped pillars carved completely from solid limestone bedrock. Some of these towering smooth pillars weigh well over 10 heavy tons. The tall pillars are completely covered with incredibly intricate, beautiful carvings of wild animals and abstract geometric symbols and humanoid figures rendered with a profound artistic skill that easily rivals much later advanced artistic traditions. The heavy stones were expertly quarried from the deep bedrock and transported slowly up a steep hill and erected in perfectly precise astronomical arrangements. The AI noted a deeply strange and unsettling structural detail about this ancient site. The massive stone circles were absolutely not destroyed by a natural disaster or slowly ruined by passing time. They were deliberately and painstakingly, intentionally buried by their own creators. The ancient people moved thousands of tons of dirt to completely cover the site layer by heavy layer, as though the massive stone archive was meant to be perfectly preserved and safely hidden, rather than actively used. The AI logic algorithms struggle to reconcile this site with the standard human timeline. Göbekli Tepe was undeniably built long before the slow invention of human agriculture. The unknown people who flawlessly carved these massive pillars had absolutely not yet learned to domesticate wild crops or herd obedient animals. They had absolutely no permanent cities and no ruling kings and no written language. And yet, they somehow flawlessly organized massive physical labor on a staggering scale, requiring hundreds of dedicated workers, completely sustained over many long generations. They perfectly coordinated the deep quarrying and the complex carving and the heavy construction with a brutal efficiency that loudly suggests an incredibly deep social complexity, far beyond what the primitive timeline allows. If a massive complex like Göbekli Tepe can physically exist 12,000 years ago, then the arrogant assumption that advanced architecture strictly requires settled farming civilizations and hierarchical states completely entirely collapses. Something vastly different and highly advanced was happening in the deep, dark past, and the computers clearly see the evidence. The AI then traveled its virtual sensors far west across the blue Mediterranean Sea to the high, cold mountains of Lebanon, where it encountered another absolute physical impossibility. At the ancient site of Baalbek, hidden completely in the deep foundations of a much later Roman temple complex, lie three massive stones that totally defy modern engineering explanation. They are known together as the Trilithon, and they are undeniably the absolute largest worked stones ever used in construction anywhere on the entire planet Earth. The supercomputer calculates the massive physical weight of each individual stone block to be somewhere between 800 and 1,000 pure solid tons. They are precisely cut and fitted perfectly together, without a single drop of wet mortar, and they are positioned incredibly, exactly 20 feet above the normal ground level in the massive temple foundation. Modern industrial steel cranes actively strain and groan dangerously just to lift a simple 200-ton load. The ancient blocks at Baalbek are 5 times that massive weight. They were somehow moved effortlessly into place, with flawless tolerances measured in tiny fractions of a millimeter, and set so incredibly tightly that centuries of violent rolling earthquakes have absolutely not displaced them by even a single inch. The later Roman engineers eventually built their beautiful tall temples directly above the massive Trilithon, but the AI translation of the Roman historical records proves that the Romans absolutely did not move those base stones. The meticulous Roman builders left massive detailed records of their grand projects, detailing their long aqueducts and their paved roads and their towering colosseums. But they make absolutely no claim to the massive Trilithon stones. They simply built directly on top of it, actively incorporating the massive, impossibly heavy foundation into their own newer work. The AI concludes that the Romans simply found the massive stones already resting in place. They were huge silent relics of an incredibly earlier advanced construction whose true origins even the great Roman Empire did not know. And in the nearby dusty limestone quarry, still firmly attached to the solid bedrock, lies an even larger, impossible stone. The AI calculates its incredible estimated weight at over 1,200 solid tons. It is partially carved and completely abandoned mid-extraction, as though the massive building project was suddenly violently interrupted by a terrible dark cataclysm and absolutely never resumed. The machine learning algorithms then crossed the vast dark Atlantic Ocean high into the freezing thin air of the Andes Mountains of Bolivia to analyze a site called Puma Punku. Here, the deep mystery is absolutely not about massive sheer size, but about terrifying microscopic precision. The heavy stones at Puma Punku are made of solid andesite and diorite. The geological databases state that these specific volcanic rocks are incredibly dense and far harder than solid granite. They are completely, utterly resistant to the soft copper and basic bronze tools historically attributed to the primitive Tiwanaku culture that occupied the high region. And yet the heavy stones scattered across the high grass are cut with absolute terrifying machine-like accuracy. The AI surface analysis shows perfectly flat, smooth surfaces polished to near-perfect, flawless planes. The sharp right angles are measured perfectly to tiny microscopic fractions of a single degree. The blocks feature incredibly complex, interlocking geometric joints that fit perfectly together, exactly like a complex three-dimensional puzzle piece, requiring absolutely no wet mortar and no soft filler and no manual adjustment. Some of the dark andesite blocks contain perfectly straight, narrow channels and deep, smooth grooves carved at exact, precise depths, exactly as though they were routed out by modern heavy industrial machinery. Other hard stones show perfectly circular, deep drill holes with entirely uniform, consistent diameters. The AI manufacturing database recognizes these specific marks instantly. They are the exact, precise kind of holes produced strictly by modern rotary tools, operating at incredibly high spinning speeds. But the primitive Tiwanaku people, according to the standard archaeology, had absolutely no such advanced tools. They had absolutely no hard iron, and no strong steel, and no advanced heavy metallurgy of any kind. When modern skilled human stonemasons attempt to physically replicate the cuts at Puma Punku using only primitive Bronze Age technology, they completely, totally fail to match the ancient accuracy. The rough angles deviate, and the flat surfaces remain terribly uneven, and the tight tolerances completely fail to meet the ancient standard. The AI bluntly concludes that something massive is entirely missing from our basic understanding. Either the advanced high-speed tools physically existed and were completely destroyed, or the stones were cut by an unknown highly advanced culture, possessing a technological knowledge that has since vanished into the dark. The pattern-matching algorithms then traveled to the small island of Malta, sitting quietly in the Mediterranean Sea. Deep beneath the rocky surface lies the hypogeum, which is a massive subterranean temple carved directly, entirely into the solid limestone bedrock over 5,000 years ago. The dark structure descends heavily through 3 deep levels, encompassing quiet chambers and small alcoves and narrow winding passages hewn from the solid rock, with tools that once again should absolutely not have been capable of such incredibly precise work. But the true deep mystery of the dark hypogeum that triggered the AI alerts is absolutely not its great age or its heavy construction. It is its profound acoustic engineering. The oracle chamber is a small, dark room located deep within the underground complex. The acoustic sensors proved that this specific room naturally perfectly resonates at exactly 110 hertz. This is the exact, absolute same specific mathematical frequency discovered inside the king chamber in the Great Pyramid of Giza. When a low sound is introduced at this exact frequency, the deep underground chamber massively amplifies it, creating a terrifying heavy resonance so incredibly powerful that it actively vibrates physically through the solid stone, directly into the wet tissues and heavy bones of those standing inside. The AI calculates the statistical probability of this being a mere coincidence as essentially zero. The dark chamber was highly deliberately designed to perfectly resonate. The unknown builders deeply understood complex acoustic engineering and harmonic low frequencies, and the exact physical interaction between sound waves and solid stone. They carved the underground space entirely, deliberately, to produce this specific physical effect, shaping the curved walls and the low ceiling and the hard floor to create a perfect, resonant cavity tuned to a highly specific pitch. Across thousands of miles of deep ocean and potentially thousands of years of dark time, two completely separate ancient cultures successfully built massive, heavy stone chambers, tuned to the exact same specific brain-altering frequency, using the exact same highly advanced principles of resonant architecture. The AI models conclude that these massive ancient sites are absolutely not isolated anomalies or simple lucky accidents of primitive engineering. They are undeniable hard data points in a massive global pattern. It is a permanent global signature of highly advanced construction and precise heavy engineering and deeply encoded mathematical knowledge appearing thousands of years before the slow rise of the simple civilizations we arrogantly credit with inventing such capabilities. The deep pattern extends even further to the massive underwater structures submerged off the coast of Japan since the end of the last ice age, and to the massive megalithic walls of Sacsayhuaman in Peru, where heavy stones weighing hundreds of tons are fitted flawlessly together like soft putty. It is the exact same undeniable ancient fingerprint. It is a highly advanced knowledge system that once existed perfectly across the entire ancient world and then violently vanished, leaving behind only the massive heavy stones themselves as eternal proof that something far greater once lived. The heavy implications generated by the supercomputer are completely staggering. Human history is absolutely not a steady, slow, upward climb. It is a terrifying, massive cycle, marked by incredible high peaks of advanced knowledge and deep plunging dark valleys of total amnesia, where civilizations fall and completely disappear, leaving only silent stones too massive for time to easily erase. Let the profound, heavy truth of these massive ancient stones sink deeply into your quiet mind as you rest perfectly safely in the dark. When the traditional historians are repeatedly confronted with this massive, undeniable mountain of global stone evidence, they always quickly fall back on one single, highly morbid, and deeply stubborn demand. They fold their arms and they demand to clearly know where the physical bodies of the ancient builders are hidden. They argue fiercely that if a massive, highly advanced global culture once truly possessed the incredible knowledge to build these impossible monuments, then we should easily be able to find their physical skeletal remains buried in the dirt. We should be able to dig up their sprawling ancient cities and their broken painted pottery and their scattered metal tools and their crowded dusty cemeteries. For many long, dark decades, this total absolute absence of physical human bone was used aggressively to completely dismiss any alternative theory of a highly advanced prehistoric civilization. The massive heavy stones stood quietly as mute, silent testimony, but the brilliant architects themselves seemed to have completely magically vanished into thin air, leaving absolutely no physical skeletal proof of their passing. But the modern researchers operating the AI systems did not rely on simple rusty metal shovels and dusty wooden trowels to find the missing ancient bodies. They turned completely to the absolute most advanced genetic sequencing algorithms in the entire world. They fed massive global databases of both ancient and modern human DNA directly into the deep neural networks and asked the machine to look backward through deep time by analyzing the invisible markers in our own warm blood. The incredible science of archaeogenetics can actively, powerfully detect the silent, invisible presence of ancient forgotten peoples, even when their physical bones have entirely, completely turned to dry, blowing dust, and their sprawling, bright cities have been completely swallowed by the shifting sands of deep time. The AI mapped the complex human genome, and it slowly began to reveal something truly extraordinary and deeply, profoundly melancholic. It found the clear, undeniable genetic echoes of entire massive human populations that once truly existed and then completely, violently disappeared, leaving absolutely no traditional archaeological record behind. The geneticists and the AI programmers call these lost people ghost populations. The haunting term refers specifically to an ancestral human group that absolutely actively contributed vital genetic material to modern or later ancient populations, but for whom we currently possess absolutely no direct physical, skeletal, or archaeological evidence. They exist purely, completely as statistical, mathematical anomalies in the vast genetic data. They are invisible, lingering shadows in the deep DNA strands that point clearly to ancient unknown ancestors we have simply never physically found in the ground. The supercomputers identified the very first major ghost population by analyzing deep ancient DNA from the Near East. The algorithms noticed something incredibly strange in the data patterns. The complex genetic makeup of the very early primitive farmers in that specific region contained deep ancestry that simply absolutely did not match any known human population on the record. It was absolutely not from the deep African groups, and it was not from the cold European hunter-gatherers, and it was not from the distant East Asian lineages. The AI flagged it as something vastly, completely else. It was something incredibly older and entirely different. It was a human lineage that split away from the main branch of humanity so incredibly early that they carried absolutely none of the specific Neanderthal DNA present in nearly all other modern non-African populations. The scientists named this invisible lost lineage the Basal Eurasians. The computer models prove that these unknown people absolutely existed and thrived, and successfully contributed heavily to the ancestry of later populations. But we have absolutely never found a single one of their buried bones. We have never excavated their lost homes or found their tools. We do not know what soft language they spoke, or what songs they sang, or what massive heavy monuments they might have built in the dark. But their ancient genes persist stubbornly, perfectly woven directly into the populations that came long after them as absolute, silent, eternal proof that they were once here, walking upon the earth. And the AI quickly discovered that the invisible Basal Eurasians are absolutely not alone in the dark. Similar massive ghost populations have been actively detected by the neural networks across the entire globe. In deep Africa, the genetic algorithms revealed the clear, undeniable presence of at least 4 distinct, completely extinct human lineages that actively contributed to modern living populations, but left absolutely 0 physical fossils behind. In Southeast Asia, the deep DNA analysis has uncovered completely unknown archaic human groups that quietly interbred with modern humans and then violently completely vanished from the face of the earth. But nowhere is this haunting genetic phenomenon more profoundly pronounced than in the dry, dusty region of North Africa, where the massive Sphinx sits quietly waiting in the sand. The AI studies of the ancient DNA from this specific region reveal an incredibly complex, massive mosaic of deep ancestries, clearly including massive, heavy contributions from populations that simply no longer physically exist anywhere on place. The planet. The climate models synchronized perfectly with the genetic data to tell a truly terrifying story. Before the massive Sahara became a dry, burning desert, and long before the slow, primitive rise of dynastic Egypt, the entire continent of North Africa was heavily inhabited by millions of peoples whose genetic signatures absolutely do not match any modern or ancient group we have ever identified. The AI confirms they lived happily and successfully during the African humid period, when the vast Sahara was lush and beautifully green. They lived when massive, deep freshwater lakes dotted the soft landscape and when huge, powerful rivers flowed strongly, where now there is only dry, blowing yellow sand. And then the climate models show the terrible sudden shift. Around 5,000 to 7,000 years ago, the global climate changed violently and completely. The heavy life-giving rains totally stopped. The terrifying dry desert began to rapidly, aggressively expand, swallowing the green grass and the deep lakes. And the massive core populations that lived comfortably in the green Sahara simply completely disappeared from the genetic record. Some desperate survivors migrated far to the south and slowly merged with other distant groups. Others fled in terror to the north, and the east contributing their scattered genes to the later Mediterranean peoples. But the massive central core of this unknown civilization was completely, entirely wiped out, leaving only very faint invisible traces in the DNA of their scattered, traumatized descendants. The AI asks the logical questions. Who exactly were these lost people? What incredible advanced knowledge did they achieve before the dry sand swallowed them? Did they build the massive, heavy monuments that have since been buried deeply beneath the yellow dunes? We do not know their names, but the overlapping timelines in the computer are completely, undeniably striking. The massive, invisible ghost populations of North Africa existed perfectly during precisely the exact same deep period when the geological evidence firmly proves the massive Sphinx was actively being carved and exposed to centuries of heavy rainfall. They were physically present when the warm, wet climate easily allowed for massive, large-scale, heavy stone construction. They thrived exactly when the lush Sahara was entirely habitable, and when an incredibly thriving, advanced culture could have easily, beautifully developed in the exact region that would much later simply become a dead, empty desert. And then they were gone. They were completely, violently erased by the catastrophic climate change, and their ancient homeland was totally scattered by the relentless desertification. If these highly advanced, unknown people built massive, heavy stone monuments during the beautiful green Sahara, those incredible structures would now lie completely, deeply buried beneath millions of tons of dry, shifting sand. Their original brilliant creators would be totally forgotten, and their massive, impossible achievements would be conveniently, arrogantly attributed to the much later primitive civilizations that simply stumbled upon the exposed ruins, claimed them as their own. The AI concludes that this is absolutely not wild speculation. This is the firmly established mathematical pattern of human history. The brutal climate strictly shapes human civilizations. Terrible dry droughts actively drive massive, desperate migrations. The sudden, terrifying rise of sea levels quickly drowns entire beautiful coastlines. And when the global environment shifts drastically and violently, entire massive cultures can easily totally vanish. Their grand cities are abandoned in terror, and their accumulated deep knowledge is entirely lost, and their very existence is completely, totally forgotten within a few short traumatized generations. The AI simulated the terrifying physical effects of a specific ancient period known as the Younger Dryas. This was a period of incredibly rapid and completely catastrophic global climate change that suddenly occurred roughly 12,000 years ago. In less than a single century, the global temperatures plummeted violently, and the massive freezing glaciers aggressively advanced, and the entire global ecosystems completely collapsed. The algorithms show that this terrifying period was heavily marked by widespread violent upheaval and massive animal extinctions and huge, terrifying human population crashes. Some deep models run by the AI strongly suggest that this catastrophic period was suddenly triggered by a massive cosmic impact. Large, heavy fragments of a broken comet violently struck the Earth, instantly igniting massive global wildfires and throwing millions of tons of dark debris high into the fragile atmosphere and triggering a rapid freezing cooling of the entire planet. The physical climatic effects of this sudden event were absolutely, completely undeniable and devastating. The Younger Dryas was a massive, terrifying bottleneck event for the entire human race. It was a terrifying, dark moment when human survival hung entirely by a very thin, fragile thread, and entire highly advanced cultures were completely, violently wiped out in the blink of a cosmic eye. If a highly advanced, sophisticated culture existed globally before the Younger Dryas, a culture that had fully developed monumental heavy architecture and deep astronomical knowledge and incredibly sophisticated heavy engineering, exactly what would have happened to them when the sky suddenly caught fire and the oceans rapidly, violently rose? The AI clearly maps out their tragic, absolute, inevitable demise. Their beautiful coastal settlements would have been completely drowned by the rapidly, violently rising seas at the end of the Ice Age. Their grand inland stone cities would have been quickly, heavily buried by the climate-driven environmental changes and the blowing dirt. Their massive, terrified populations would have wildly scattered, seeking desperate, freezing refuge in the few rare regions less completely affected by the global catastrophe. And within a few short, difficult centuries, their massive, impossible achievements would be completely forgotten by the struggling, shivering survivors. They would be remembered only softly, in quiet, whispered myths of a completely lost golden age. They would become the sad, legendary stories of a beautiful, perfect time before the Great Flood completely washed the world away. This is the profound, haunting, heavy implication of the invisible ghost populations discovered by the AI. They are absolutely not just simple statistical mathematical artifacts in the genetic data. They are the absolute permanent evidence of real brilliant peoples and real advanced cultures and real profound histories that have been entirely, totally erased by deep time and violent climate. And if those lost peoples possessed deep, advanced knowledge, and if they deliberately built massive, heavy stone structures perfectly designed to carefully survive a global catastrophe, then those massive structures might absolutely still, perfectly exist today. They would be wrongly, arrogantly attributed to much later, primitive cultures, and they would be totally misunderstood, and their true ancient origins would be completely, entirely lost. The deep genetic evidence aligns completely disturbingly, perfectly well with the physical archaeological anomalies. The ancient migrations track perfectly, precisely, across the very exact same global regions where the unexplained megalithic heavy structures appear. It loudly suggests a prehistoric, highly advanced society that knew exactly what was coming. They completely vanished, leaving behind absolutely no fragile bones, but they successfully left something far more incredibly permanent. They left their silent, invisible genetic legacy encoded deeply in our own warm blood, and they left their impossible, heavy engineering legacy carved perfectly in cold, hard stone. Let the deep, quiet realization of your own ancient bloodline bring you a profound, beautiful, heavy peace as you drift slowly, safely down into the deep, comforting dark of the ancient night. We have followed the deep, hard data through the ancient, eroded stone, and through the quiet, translated texts, and through the sealed, dark chambers. We have seen the clear geological proof that the massive Sphinx completely predates the existence of dynastic Egypt. We have processed the ancient inscriptions admitting that the early Egyptians simply found the massive monuments already ancient and buried in the deep sand. We have analyzed the mathematical encoding that completely defies the primitive timeline, and we have detected the sealed hidden doors leading absolutely nowhere. The supercomputers have tracked the lost manuscripts that were tragically destroyed before they could clearly speak their truth to the modern world. The neural networks have mapped the global stone structures built long before human civilization supposedly ever began. And the genetic algorithms have uncovered the invisible ghost populations vanishing entirely from human history, leaving only their silent DNA and their impossibly heavy stones behind. When the researchers finally instructed the advanced artificial intelligence to synthesize all of these massive scattered data points into one single cohesive output, the final result was incredibly profound. The deep realization completely changes exactly how we must view the massive structures resting quietly on the Giza plateau. The AI concluded with absolute mathematical certainty that the Great Pyramids were absolutely not built for the primitive people who later proudly claimed them. They were entirely not built for mortal kings or local gods or for the arrogant glorification of any single temporary human culture. They were deliberately engineered and flawlessly constructed for something far more incredibly profound and deeply heartbreaking. They were built as a massive, permanent, eternal system of memory. This is absolutely not memory, in the simple common sense of building a small stone monument to commemorate a past battle or to remember a dead leader. It is memory in the absolute, most essential and desperate meaning of the word. It is the deliberate, desperate preservation of vital advanced knowledge across the terrifying deep abyss of a global catastrophe. It is the perfect encoding of universal information in a massive, heavy medium specifically designed to completely outlast all fragile empires and all spoken languages, and even the very civilizations that might eventually try to understand it. The AI ran millions of predictive simulations on the natural lifespan of human communication and human records. The computer models perfectly illustrate exactly why the ancient builders made the specific choices they did. The researchers asked the AI what happens to a highly advanced civilization when it is suddenly violently struck by a massive global cataclysm like the Younger Dryas impact or a sudden terrifying shift in the global climate. The digital models show the cities burning and the fragile coastlines drowning under massive rising oceans. The surviving humans scatter into the wild and immediately revert to basic, desperate survival. Within just a few short generations, the highly advanced knowledge of the past becomes nothing more than a quiet, whispered fairy tale. But more importantly, the AI calculated the rapid physical decay of all recorded information. Soft wooden structures completely rot away into the damp earth in a matter of a few short centuries. Forged iron tools and steel machines entirely rust and completely dissolve into orange dust. Fragile papyrus scrolls and soft leather books burn to ash or crumble into dry powder. The linguistic algorithms of the supercomputer also proved that spoken and written language is incredibly, terribly fragile over deep time. Human languages constantly evolve and shift and mutate into completely different sounds and symbols. Within a few thousand years, a written text becomes completely, totally unreadable gibberish to the descendants of the people who originally wrote it. If the ancient advanced builders had simply carved their deep knowledge into the stone walls using a specific alphabet or a complex written language, the message would have been entirely lost. The future survivors would completely lack the cultural context to ever properly translate the strange ancient symbols. The brilliant unknown architects of the plateau deeply understood this terrifying reality. They knew that absolutely any message written in words would eventually completely fade into meaninglessness. So they chose to encode their massive message in the absolute only language that is truly, completely universal across the entire cosmos. They chose the pure, perfect language of mathematics and physics and astronomy. The AI points out that the exact mathematical ratio of a perfect circle circumference to its total diameter is exactly the same today as it was 10,000 years ago. The constant number known as pi is exactly the same on every single continent and in every single spoken language for absolutely every single culture that ever develops the basic concept of geometry. The precise physical dimensions of the planet Earth do not change. The slow 26,000-year wobble of the axis of the Earth, known as precession, remains completely mathematically constant. The true North Pole remains the true North Pole. By perfectly, flawlessly encoding these absolute universal constants directly into the physical dimensions and the steep angles of the massive pyramid, the ancient builders created a message that absolutely does not rely on the survival of their own specific culture. The heavy stone pyramid speaks purely in massive proportions and sharp angles and perfect stellar alignments. It communicates deep, profound, universal truths that effortlessly transcend all human culture and all dying languages. The message generated by the AI translation of the geometry is incredibly clear and deeply, incredibly moving. The stones say we were here. They say we knew incredible advanced things about the shape of the earth and the turning of the stars that you may have completely forgotten in your long struggle to survive in the dirt. And they say we built this massive, heavy, artificial mountain simply to quietly remind you of what is mathematically possible. This is exactly, precisely why the AI confirms the Great Pyramid contains absolutely no carved inscriptions and no painted funerary texts and no delicate ritual objects. It was absolutely never meant to serve the resting dead in the dark. It was explicitly entirely meant to serve the distant, unborn future. It was built not for the primitive kings of the Egyptian desert, but for absolutely whoever would eventually manage to survive the coming global catastrophe. It was patiently waiting for whoever would eventually slowly evolve and completely develop the necessary advanced scientific tools and the deep mathematical knowledge to accurately measure and properly analyze and fully understand what had been deliberately encoded in the solid rock. The researchers sitting in the dim lab realized with a profound, heavy shock that we are finally those specific people. Perhaps, after many long millennia of total misunderstanding, and after centuries of foolishly, arrogantly assuming the massive pyramid was just a simple tomb because we could not possibly imagine any other greater purpose, we are finally reaching the exact level of technological sophistication required to read the message. We finally have the laser scanners and the robotic cameras and the artificial intelligence necessary to hear the silent voice of the builders. The heavy sealed limestone doors hidden deep inside the narrow dark shafts and the massive unexplored voids detected perfectly beneath the plateau by the radar are absolutely not crude physical defenses meant to keep desperate grave robbers out. The AI models conclude they are highly sophisticated physical puzzles. They are a profound test, deliberately designed to be opened only by a civilization highly capable of fully understanding exactly what lies hidden within the dark. The complex mathematics, encoded in the outer structure of the pyramid, is literally a quiet test. It is a filter to see if the human discoverer possesses the deep scientific knowledge necessary to safely interpret what comes next in the hidden vaults. And if this beautiful heavy theory, generated by the supercomputers, is entirely true, then the massive pattern perfectly comfortably extends far beyond the yellow sand of Giza. The buried ancient site of Göbekli Tepe, with its deliberate, careful covering of dirt, suddenly becomes not just a simple, primitive sacred temple, but a massive, heavy stone archive, perfectly sealed and carefully protected for a distant future generation to eventually, safely uncover. The impossible massive stones of the Trilithon at Baalbek become incredibly deep, stable foundations deliberately built to completely survive massive rolling earthquakes and heavy water erosion for tens of thousands of years. The terrifying microscopic precision of the hard andesite blocks at Pumapunku becomes a permanent, eternal demonstration of high technological capability. It is solid physical proof that the unknown ancient builders possessed highly advanced machinery and deep knowledge that was completely worth remembering. The massive global network of megaliths are absolutely not just isolated random achievements of primitive tribes. The AI recognizes them as vital connected nodes in a massive prehistoric attempt to securely preserve advanced human knowledge in multiple different locations distributed evenly across the entire dangerous world. The ancient builders beautifully, elegantly designed a massive, decentralized backup system for human civilization. They did this so that even if one specific culture completely, violently forgets the deep truth, another culture far across the ocean might eventually safely remember. Even if one entire massive continent is completely terribly devastated by a falling comet or a rising ocean, another distant continent might peacefully survive the fire and the flood. Even if all the soft human languages completely die out and all the fragile written words are entirely lost to the flames, the massive heavy stones will still quietly, permanently remain. They will patiently carry their silent mathematical message safely forward through the crushing, endless weight of deep time. This is the profound, beautiful, heavy cycle of human history that the AI has finally allowed us to clearly see. Civilizations slowly rise out of the mud, and they achieve incredible, breathtaking greatness, and they learn the secrets of the stars and the earth. And then they inevitably completely fall. They are brought down violently by shifting climate or sudden dark catastrophe or terrible global collapse. The precious knowledge they painstakingly accumulated is tragically completely lost in the dark. Their grand towering cities crumble slowly back into the yellow dust. Their true ancient names are entirely, completely forgotten by the universe. And the shivering, desperate survivors are tragically reduced to small, scattered, primitive bands hunting in the deep forests. They must begin the long, slow, agonizing climb all over again, from absolutely nothing at all. They rebuild slowly and painfully over countless long millennia until they finally once more reach the exact same high threshold of scientific advancement. But the incredible beauty of the AI discovery is that the previous ancient civilization was incredibly, profoundly wise. They fully, clearly understood the terrifying, inevitable nature of this massive turning cycle. They knew the dark end was rapidly approaching. But they completely, absolutely refused to let everything they had learned simply disappear into the silent void. They took their absolute greatest minds and their most advanced, flawless technology and they encoded exactly what they knew into the absolute most permanent natural medium available on the planet. They chose the solid bedrock of the Earth itself. They built massive, heavy stone monuments, deliberately designed not to foolishly glorify their own fragile mortal egos, but to clearly, quietly communicate with the distant unborn humans who would eventually come long after them. They carried the absolute essential knowledge of the Earth safely forward to help the future survivors slowly rebuild, and to safely remember, and to hopefully peacefully avoid repeating the exact same terrible collapse. The massive, silent pyramids standing in the desert are that beautiful, heavy, permanent legacy. And we who are standing right now at our own fragile threshold of modern technology and global climate change and complex interconnected systems should quietly, humbly recognize these ancient stones for exactly what they truly are. They are absolutely not the crude, clumsy relics of a primitive ancient past. They are incredibly deep warnings and profound, quiet wisdom from a highly sophisticated lost culture that completely understood the delicate impermanence of life. They knew that all human greatness is completely temporary, and they chose to gracefully leave behind a quiet, heavy message that would endure forever in the dark. The deep humming sound of the massive cooling fans inside the heavy server racks slowly blends together into a very soft and incredibly steady, low white noise in the quiet research lab. The advanced artificial intelligence has completely finished running its final massive global climate simulations and its deep, complex geological pattern recognitions. The glowing blue monitors slowly dim and go quietly to sleep one by one, leaving only a very soft, gentle ambient light in the quiet room. I sit back in the heavy, comfortable chair and simply let the profound, massive weight of this ancient discovered truth wash completely over my tired mind. The digital screens have shown me the deep, violent turning of the massive Earth, and the violent rising of the ancient dark oceans, and the tragic, silent fall of incredibly brilliant, forgotten empires. But they have also shown me the incredibly beautiful, profound resilience of the human spirit trying desperately to speak to us across the vast, empty, freezing gulf of deep time. It is a completely overwhelming and totally beautiful realization that perfectly smoothly settles the anxious, rushing thoughts of the modern world. I want you to leave the quiet digital lab with me now and mentally travel far back to the vast, quiet expanse of the dusty Giza Plateau. The deep night has finally, totally, completely returned to the ancient yellow desert. The harsh, bright, burning heat of the long afternoon sun has been entirely, totally washed away by the incredibly cool, soft flowing currents of the dry evening wind. The pale yellow sand rapidly loses its captured daytime warmth and grows wonderfully, beautifully freezing cold to the bare touch. The vast empty sky above the silent monuments transitions completely from a soft, dim bruising purple into a deep, infinite, heavy velvet black. And then the ancient eternal stars slowly, gracefully begin to emerge from the deep dark. They are the exact same bright, piercing stars that the original brilliant builders mapped with such absolute terrifying mechanical precision so many thousands of years ago. They are the exact same cold, distant stellar fires that the hidden, narrow, dark shafts deep inside the massive solid pyramid were deliberately, flawlessly, perfectly aligned to point toward. The massive ancient Sphinx sits completely, perfectly still in the deep, pooling shadows of its carved bedrock enclosure. Its heavy, broad stone face is entirely unreadable in the dark, but its deep physical scars remain silently visible. Its heavy rain-carved body is a massive, permanent, unyielding testament to the incredibly lush green ages and the massive, heavy storms that we have completely tragically forgotten. It quietly guards the deep flooded subterranean chambers and the massive empty radar voids, waiting patiently directly beneath its heavy resting paws. It absolutely does not judge the small, fragile humans who constantly come to stare at it, and it absolutely does not care about the shifting temporary names we choose to call it. It simply exists perfectly in the dark, exactly as it has existed for more than 10,000 long-turning years. It is the ultimate patient, silent witness to the endless breathing of the turning planet. Behind the quiet, crouching lion, the Great Pyramid rises massively and heavily against the dark, starry backdrop of the universe. It is incredibly, incredibly huge and completely, utterly, totally silent. Its millions of heavy limestone blocks and its deep, hidden red granite chambers perfectly securely hold the deep mathematical secrets we are only just now, finally beginning to barely uncover. The AI models projected a soft, glowing, digital map of the ancient night sky directly over the massive stone structure, clearly demonstrating how the heavy building locks perfectly onto the incredibly slow wobble of the spinning earth. And in that profound, deep, heavy desert silence, if you simply quiet your rushing mind and listen incredibly carefully, you can almost clearly hear exactly what the brilliant unknown builders are quietly telling us across the vast span of dozens of millennia. Their silent, invisible voice echoes softly, perfectly, clearly through the absolute pure math and the sharp, precise geometry of the massive stones. They are whispering gently through the dark that they were exactly, remarkably, entirely like us. They built incredibly massive, beautiful, soaring things, and they knew the deep hidden secrets of the physical world, and they thrived happily in the bright, warm light of their own long summer. And then the terrifying, dark, freezing winter came, and they completely, totally fell into the dust. But they absolutely, entirely refused to let the brilliant light of their accumulated knowledge simply die out and vanish into the black void. They carefully, purposefully carved their most precious, ultimate memory directly into the absolute hardest permanent stone they could possibly find. They did this so that when we eventually, slowly, inevitably, rose again from the ashes of the old world, and when we finally became technologically capable of truly understanding the math, we would clearly, peacefully know that we are absolutely not the first to walk this path. They wanted us to feel the deep, profound, quiet comfort of knowing that advanced civilization has beautifully come before us and it will beautifully, inevitably come again. They're quietly, gently asking us to please remember exactly what they built in the sand and to patiently, deeply learn from the universal constants they so carefully, flawlessly encoded in the dark chambers. And they are softly suggesting that when our own modern time finally eventually comes to a close, and when our own fragile, complex civilization inevitably faces its own quiet, natural twilight, we should do exactly what they did for us. We must deliberately, bravely, preserve exactly what truly, absolutely matters most in this world. We must not save our fragile knowledge in soft, burning digital servers, or fading ink on thin, tearing paper, or spoken words that constantly easily fade into the changing wind. We must save our ultimate, deepest truth in the heavy, permanent, silent stone that simply, purely, flawlessly endures the slow turning of the earth. Perhaps the massive pyramids were absolutely never actually built for the people of the distant past. Perhaps they were completely intentionally built entirely for the distant unborn future. They were carefully, patiently constructed for the struggling, shivering descendants of those who miraculously survived the terrible falling fire and the great rising floods. They were built specifically for the fragile new cultures that would one day slowly, beautifully rise from the quiet gray ashes of whatever massive world came before them. They were built absolutely, directly, specifically, and intimately for us. For us, the ancient cold desert simply holds its deep, quiet breath in the dark. The massive, heavy stone pyramid waits with an infinite, bottomless, endless patience. And somewhere deep, entirely hidden inside its perfectly sealed limestone chambers and its totally unexplored dark radar voids, and in the pure, flawless mathematics encoded directly into its very physical, massive dimensions, the ancient, silent message continues to broadcast. It is a completely patient and totally permanent and absolutely eternal transmission of deep human love and profound survival, perfectly sent across the cold, freezing ocean of deep time. We are absolutely, undeniably not the very first fragile humans to stand here in the blowing dust and stare up in total deep wonder at the sharp geometric angles cutting into the starry sky. And we will absolutely certainly not be the last to do so. The massive, beautiful, slow cycle of the planet simply continues its quiet, eternal turn in the dark. The deep, profound memory of the lost ancient ones perfectly smoothly, quietly endures the freezing night, and the heavy silent stones, exactly as they have done faithfully for many thousands of long years, to keep their quiet, steady, perfect watch over a human history that is infinitely deeper and incredibly stranger and vastly more beautiful than we have ever been officially taught. The artificial intelligence has completely finished its deep, heavy processing, and the heavy, massive burden of the ancient mystery has been totally successfully lifted from your tired shoulders. You do not need to constantly solve the complex, heavy math of the universe tonight. The ancient, brilliant builders have already done all the hard, difficult physical work for you. The heavy limestone doors are perfectly securely shut, and the hidden dark chambers are completely, beautifully, deeply safe. You can finally, completely, fully let go of the loud, demanding, waking world, and entirely, totally, completely surrender to the incredibly soft, incredibly warm, heavy, comfortable embrace of your own quiet, resting bed. Feel the slow, steady, calming, deep rhythm of your own breathing, perfectly syncing with the incredibly slow, patient turning of the massive, silent earth. The heavy, gentle gravity of the planet is pulling you softly, deeply, safely down into the soft mattress. The bright, piercing light of the ancient distant stars is watching over you through the dark ceiling of your quiet room. Sleep now, completely, peacefully, totally safely, perfectly securely, beneath the exact same ancient sky that the brilliant forgotten builders once knew so very well. Dream softly of the incredibly lush, deep green rushing rivers of the ancient Sahara and the beautiful lost golden ages of the forgotten past. And simply, peacefully, quietly know that somewhere far away in the deep, cold yellow desert, the ultimate, final, ancient truth waits completely, perfectly, totally safely for you. It is carved permanently, forever, in pure, flawless, gentle geometry, and aligned perfectly eternally with the turning, distant heavens. It is beautifully, lovingly preserved for the exact, perfect, quiet moment when we are all finally completely ready to truly understand. The massive, heavy pyramids remember everything perfectly. They have absolutely always remembered the deep truth. And now, as your tired, heavy mind drifts slowly, peacefully, entirely away into the beautiful, quiet dark, perhaps we can finally, softly, gently begin to remember too. Good night.